Nobody wanted the little black tailless kitten until something amazing happened. Nobody wanted the little black tailless kitten. The tiny creature with fur as dark as midnight and eyes the color of fresh spring leaves had been born different. Where other kittens had elegant tails that swished and flicked with their moods, he had only a small stub, a reminder that he would never be quite like the others. The early morning dew still clung to the blades of grass as the little kitten limped through the quiet streets of Millersfield. His thin body shivered in the cool air, ribs visible beneath his matted black coat. He had been wandering for days now, searching for food, shelter, and perhaps most importantly, acceptance. Millersfield was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The houses stood in neat rows along narrow streets, their paint fading gracefully with age. Most residents led simple, predictable lives, working their jobs, tending their gardens, and keeping mostly to themselves. It was not the kind of place that welcomed unexpected visitors, especially not a bedraggled black kitten with no tail. The little cat paused at the corner of Main Street and Baker Avenue, his green eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. His first week of independence had taught him harsh lessons about human cruelty. Would today be any different? Or would he once again face rejection from those who saw him as incomplete, unwanted, or, as he had overheard some townsfolk whisper, bad luck? The smell of fresh bread wafted from Miller's bakery, making the kitten's empty stomach growl painfully. When was the last time he had eaten something substantial? 2 days ago? 3. The memories blurred together in a haze of hunger and exhaustion. He crept cautiously toward the back of the bakery, hoping to find scraps in the garbage bins. "Shoo! Get out of here!" A large man in a flour-covered apron burst through the back door, waving a broom threateningly. "We don't need vermin around our food!" The kitten darted away, his heart pounding in his tiny chest. Vermin. That's all he was to them. A pest, a nuisance, something unwanted. He slunk behind a stack of empty crates, trembling. Would he ever find a place where he belonged? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the little cat continued his journey through town. Each encounter seemed to reinforce his status as an outcast. Children pointed and laughed at his missing tail, calling him half-cat. A woman setting out her garbage recoiled when she spotted him, muttering something about black cats and bad fortune. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion had settled deep in his bones. The kitten found temporary shelter beneath a parked truck, grateful for the shade it provided from the increasingly hot sun. His eyelids grew heavy as he listened to the distant sounds of life carrying on around him. People going about their day, oblivious to the small life struggling to survive on their streets. What would become of him? The question hung in his mind as he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Did anyone care that he existed? Would anyone ever look past his differences and see him for what he truly was? Not just a tailless black cat, but a living being with a heart that yearned for connection. Little did the small kitten know that his life was about to change forever, and that the very things that made him different would soon become his greatest strengths. The little black kitten awoke with a start, as raindrops began to patter against the pavement. Night had fallen while he slept, and the truck that had sheltered him was gone. Cold water trickled through his fur, sending shivers down his spine. He needed to find proper shelter, and quickly. Hunger gnawed at his belly as he darted from one inadequate hiding place to another. An overturned garbage can offered momentary respite, but the smell of rotting food made his empty stomach churn uncomfortably. Behind the laundromat, warm air billowed from vents, but the constant rumble of machines inside kept him on edge. Nowhere felt safe. By midnight, the rain had intensified. The kitten's black fur was plastered to his small frame, making him look even more pitiful than before. His usual cautious pace had slowed to a weary trudge as he made his way down Riverside Street, a quiet residential lane on the edge of town. The houses here were older, set further apart, with large yards bordered by ancient oak trees. Most windows were dark, their inhabitants long since retired for the night. The little cat barely noticed his surroundings anymore. His focus had narrowed to simply putting one paw in front of another. Then, something made him stop. House number 86 stood slightly apart from its neighbors. Unlike the other well-maintained homes on the street, this one showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the window frames, and untrimmed bushes crowded the walkway. But what caught the kitten's attention wasn't the house's appearance. It was the profound silence that seemed to emanate from it, not the empty silence of an abandoned building, but something deeper, more resonant. It was the silence of loneliness, of absence. Somehow the little cat recognized it, as if it matched the quiet ache inside himself. The small porch light cast a warm yellow glow on the welcome mat. Without fully understanding why, the kitten approached. The overhang of the porch roof offered shelter from the rain, and the concrete felt almost warm beneath his cold paws. He circled 3 times, then curled into a tight ball directly on the welcome mat. Despite his wet fur and rumbling stomach, something about this place allowed him to relax. His breathing slowed, and the tension began to leave his small body. Maybe, just maybe, he could rest here undisturbed until morning. Inside the house, 72-year-old Morel Wallace slept fitfully. Since losing her husband Robert 3 years ago, sleep had become elusive. She would drift off briefly, only to be jolted awake by dreams of conversations they would never have, or by the phantom sound of his key in the door. Before dawn, Morel woke as she always did, in the darkest part of night when the silence of the house seemed to press against her ears. She had developed a routine to combat the loneliness of these early hours. Tea brewing on the stove, the soft murmur of the radio for company, and watching the sun gradually illuminate her neglected garden. As the first pale light of morning crept across the sky, Morel wrapped her faded blue robe tightly around herself and moved to collect the newspaper from her porch. It was one of the small rituals she maintained, even though most days the paper remained folded and unread on her kitchen table. She opened the door, expecting to see nothing but the usual empty porch. Instead, her eyes fell upon a small black bundle on her welcome mat. For a moment, she thought someone had left a forgotten glove or perhaps a child's toy. Then the bundle moved. 2 bright green eyes stared up at her from a face so thin and small that it barely seemed real. The kitten didn't run. He didn't hiss or cower. He simply looked at her with an unblinking gaze that seemed to reach beyond her surprise and connect with something deeper. For the first time in years, Morel felt truly seen. Neither moved for several long seconds. The world seemed to hold its breath as woman and cat regarded each other. Then, slowly, Morel closed the door. What would she do about the unexpected visitor? And why did those green eyes haunt her thoughts as she went about her morning routine, glancing repeatedly toward the front door and wondering if the tiny cat was still there? Morel couldn't stop thinking about the little black cat on her porch. All through her morning routine, heating water for tea, adjusting the dial on her old radio to find the classical music station, straightening the already neat stack of books on her side table, her mind kept returning to those penetrating green eyes. "It's just a stray," she told herself firmly, stirring honey into her tea. "Probably belongs to someone in the neighborhood. No need to get involved." But by mid-morning, curiosity got the better of her. She peeked through the curtains covering her front window. The welcome mat was empty. A strange disappointment settled in her chest. Of course the cat had moved on. Everything did, eventually. The day progressed like any other. Morel dusted the framed photographs that lined her mantelpiece. Robert in his Navy uniform, their wedding day, holidays at the lake house before they sold it. The familiar ache of loss accompanied each image, softened somewhat by time, but never truly gone. That evening, as she prepared her simple dinner of tomato soup and toast, a noise from outside caught her attention. A soft scratching, barely audible above the gentle bubbling of the soup. Morel froze, listening intently. There it was again, a tentative sound like a question being asked. Hesitantly, she approached the front door and opened it a crack. There, in the gathering twilight, sat the little black cat. If possible, he looked even smaller and thinner than before. His fur was dull and his breathing seemed labored, but those eyes, those remarkable green eyes, remained bright and alert. "You came back," Morel whispered, surprised to hear her own voice. The cat blinked slowly, as if confirming her observation. Morel stood in the doorway, uncertain. She hadn't had a pet since Pepper, the spaniel she and Robert had owned during the early years of their marriage. After Pepper died, they'd agreed it was too painful to get attached again. And now, here was this stray cat looking at her as if he belonged on her porch. "I don't have any cat food," she told him apologetically. "I'm not sure what cats even eat these days." The kitten continued to gaze at her, unmoving. Something about his patient stillness touched a place inside Mirelle that had been closed off for a long time. Before she could overthink it, she retreated into her kitchen. She returned moments later with a small saucer of milk and placed it cautiously on the porch, stepping back quickly. "That's all for now," she said firmly, closing the door. But she couldn't resist peeking through the curtains again. The little cat approached the saucer slowly, sniffed at the milk, and began to lap eagerly. Mirelle watched, transfixed, as his small pink tongue darted in and out. When he finished, he looked directly at her window, as if he knew she was there. Then, without any fuss, he settled back onto the welcome mat, curling his thin body into a tight ball. That night, Mirelle lay awake longer than usual, thinking about the stray cat. She remembered reading somewhere that milk wasn't actually good for cats. What else had she gotten wrong? The thought bothered her more than it should have. The next morning, the kitten was gone again, but Mirelle found herself watching for him throughout the day. When evening came, she had already prepared a small plate with bits of leftover chicken and a fresh bowl of water. Sure enough, as dusk settled over Millersfield, the scratching sound returned. This time, Mirelle opened the door wider. "I thought you might come back," she said softly, setting down the offerings. The little cat approached more confidently this time, though he still maintained a respectful distance from her. As he ate, Mirelle noticed again that he had no tail, just a small scarred nub where one should have been. She also saw how his right back leg seemed slightly twisted, causing him to favor his left side. "You've had a rough time of it, haven't you?" she murmured. For the first time in years, Mirelle felt a stirring of something beyond her grief and loneliness, a sense of purpose, however small. She watched the cat eat until the plate was clean, then reluctantly closed the door as he settled onto the welcome mat once more. That night, she dreamed not of Robert, but of a small black shadow moving through her house, bringing with it a strange sense of comfort. When she woke, she found herself wondering, was she ready to let something new into her life? And what would it mean to care again, when caring always led to loss in the end? Days passed, and a routine emerged. The little black cat would appear at dusk, eat whatever Mirelle provided, and then curl up on the welcome mat. Each evening, she would leave the porch light on for him, though she wasn't sure why she bothered. It wasn't as if he needed it to see in the dark. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The kitten arrived earlier each day, sometimes in the late afternoon. Mirelle found herself watching the clock, anticipating his appearance. She started reading the pet care section in magazines at the doctor's office, and even asked the checkout clerk at the grocery store what kind of food was best for a young cat. "Is it for your cat, Mrs. Wallace?" the clerk had asked. No, Mirelle had replied quickly. "Just curious." But she had left with a small bag of kitten food and a blue plastic bowl that now resided permanently on her porch. One particularly warm evening in early summer, Mirelle decided to sit on the porch while the cat ate. She settled into her wicker chair, a well-worn copy of Jane Austen's Persuasion in her lap. The kitten approached cautiously, eyeing both the food bowl and Mirelle with equal parts hunger and wariness. "It's all right," she said softly. "I won't bother you." She pretended to read while watching him from the corner of her eye. He ate quickly, as always, but instead of retreating to the welcome mat afterward, he surprised her by sitting just a few feet away, meticulously grooming his black fur. "You know," Mirelle said conversationally, "you really should have a name. I can't keep calling you the cat in my head." The kitten paused in his grooming to look at her. Mirelle considered for a moment. "What about Midnight? No, too obvious for a black cat." She tapped her finger against the book in her lap. "Shadow? No, not quite right either." The memory came suddenly, her grandfather's garden behind the old farmhouse in Vermont, the tall feathery plants that swayed in the summer breeze, their licorice scent filling the air as she helped him harvest. "Fennel," she said decisively. "That's what I'll call you. It suits you somehow." The cat, Fennel, blinked slowly, as if considering the name. "It's settled then," Mirelle nodded. She returned to her book, but the words swam before her eyes as she realized with a start that she was smiling. How long had it been since something had made her smile? In the days that followed, Fennel grew bolder. He ventured closer to Mirelle when she sat on the porch, eventually allowing her to place the food bowl next to her chair. She noticed that his fur was becoming sleeker, his body less gaunt. The knobbly spine that had been so prominent when she first saw him was now less visible beneath a healthier layer of muscle. "You're looking better, Fennel," she told him one evening. "A proper cat now, not just skin and bones." Morel had taken to talking to him more and more. At first it had felt strange to speak aloud after so many silent months, but now the words came easily. She told him about the book she was reading, complained about the increasing heat of summer, and occasionally when the evening grew deep and the crickets sang loudly in the garden, she spoke of Robert. "He would have liked you," she said softly one night. He always preferred cats to dogs, though he never admitted it to Pepper. Fennel sat perfectly still, his green eyes fixed on her face as if he understood every word. The real turning point came during a sudden summer thunderstorm. The rain had begun unexpectedly, catching Morel off guard as she watered her neglected flower beds. She hurried inside, surprised to find Fennel darting through the door alongside her. For a moment, they both froze, Morel with water dripping from her hair, Fennel with his fur plastered to his small frame. They stared at each other, equally startled by this unexpected boundary crossing. "Well," Morel said finally, "I suppose you can stay until the storm passes." Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle. Fennel slunk deeper into the house, finding shelter beneath the old console table in the hallway. Morel toweled her hair dry and went about preparing dinner, hyper-aware of the small presence in her home. The storm raged for hours. By the time it passed, night had fallen, and Morel found herself reluctant to send Fennel back outside. "Just for tonight," she told herself as she prepared for bed. "He can stay just for tonight." In the darkness of her bedroom, she heard the soft padding of paws on the hardwood floor. Then, a nearly imperceptible weight settled at the foot of her bed. Morel lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. What had she started by allowing him in? And why did the thought of him leaving in the morning fill her with such unexpected sadness? Morel woke the next morning to find the foot of her bed empty. For one disorienting moment, she wondered if she had dreamed the events of the previous night. The storm, Fennel coming inside, the small weight on her bed. Then she heard it, a soft thump from the direction of the kitchen. She found him perched on the windowsill watching birds in the overgrown garden. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass, turning his black fur almost iridescent with hints of deep brown and purple. His tail, or rather, the place where a tail should have been, twitched slightly as he tracked the movement of a robin hopping across the lawn. "Good morning, Fennel," Morel said, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. The cat turned to look at her, those remarkable green eyes blinking slowly. He made no sound. She had yet to hear him meow, but his gaze was eloquent enough. "I suppose you're hungry." As she prepared breakfast for them both, Morel realized that her usual morning routine had been pleasantly disrupted. Normally, she would have already had her tea, listened to the news on the radio, and spent at least 15 minutes staring blankly at the crossword puzzle before giving up. Today, she found herself humming as she scrambled an egg for herself and cut a small portion to cool for Fennel. "This isn't a permanent arrangement," she told him as she set down a saucer with the egg and some of the kitten food from the porch. "You understand that, don't you?" Fennel ignored her, focusing entirely on the food. Morel smiled despite herself. After breakfast, she expected him to want to go outside, but he showed no interest in the door. Instead, he followed her from room to room as she went about her chores, watching from doorways as she made the bed, sitting on the closed toilet lid as she brushed her teeth, curling up on the arm of the sofa as she attempted the crossword puzzle, with more success than usual. His presence changed the atmosphere of the house. Rooms that had felt too large and empty now seemed just the right size. The silence, which had pressed against her ears for so long, now held comfortable pauses rather than yawning voids. By mid-afternoon, Morel found herself addressing remarks to Fennel that she would normally have kept to herself. "I should really dust those shelves," she said, eyeing the living room bookcase. Fennel, lounging on the window seat, offered no opinion. "The garden's become a wilderness." Robert would be appalled. This observation was met with a slow blink. "Mrs. Henderson from the church keeps calling. I suppose I should call her back." At this, Fennel stood, stretched languidly, and jumped down from the window seat to pad into the kitchen, as if voting with his feet. Morel laughed outright. "Yes, I think you're right. Mrs. Henderson can wait another day." As evening approached, Morel wondered if Fennel would want to return to his outdoor life. She opened the front door experimentally, but he merely glanced at it before returning his attention to bathing his front paw. "Very well," she said, closing it again, "but we'll need to make some arrangements if you're staying." The next day found Morel doing something she hadn't done in months, walking to the main street shops. The 5-block journey left her more winded than she cared to admit, but there was a certain satisfaction in moving purposefully through the world again. At Pete's general store, she filled a small basket with items she hadn't bought in years. A proper cat food bowl, a small cushioned bed, a package of toy mice, and a little brush the package claimed was perfect for short-haired cats. "Got yourself a pet, Mrs. Wallace?" Pete asked as he rang up her purchases. "Not exactly," Morel replied. "More of a temporary arrangement." Pete nodded knowingly. "That's how it starts. My wife brought home a temporary goldfish 15 years ago. We've got an aquarium that takes up half the living room now." Morel smiled politely but said nothing more. She wasn't getting attached. She was simply being practical about a situation that had presented itself. That evening, as she set up the new bed in a corner of the living room, Fennel watched with apparent indifference. But when she settled into her armchair with her knitting, another long-abandoned activity she had suddenly felt inspired to resume, he surprised her by climbing directly into her lap. For a moment, Morel sat perfectly still, her hands frozen in mid-air. Fennel turned around 3 times, then curled into a tight ball, his small body radiating warmth against her legs. Hesitantly, she lowered one hand to stroke his back. A deep, rumbling purr rose from his chest, the first sound she had heard him make. The sound unwound something tight inside her. Morel felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she couldn't have explained exactly why. She continued to pet him gently, marveling at the silky texture of his fur and the growing resonance of his purr. That night, Fennel did not sleep at the foot of the bed. Instead, he curled against Morel's side, his small head tucked against her shoulder. As she drifted off to sleep, she realized that for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel absolutely alone. What would tomorrow bring in this new, shared life? And why did she suddenly feel both terrified and exhilarated by the possibilities? As summer eased into early fall, life with Fennel settled into a comfortable rhythm. Morel found herself looking forward to each day in a way she hadn't for years. Small tasks that had once seemed pointless now had purpose. The grocery shopping included careful selection of cat treats. The morning newspaper became a shared activity with Fennel sprawled across sections she wasn't reading. Even the garden received attention. As Morel realized, Fennel enjoyed watching her work from various sunny spots. "You're a demanding supervisor," she told him one afternoon as she trimmed back overgrown rose bushes. Fennel, perched regally on the garden bench, responded with a slow blink that Morel had come to interpret as affection. She had made a small concession regarding his sleeping arrangements. The cat bed remained unused in the living room, while Fennel claimed a permanent spot on her pillow each night. His warm presence beside her head had somehow helped with the insomnia that had plagued her since Robert's passing. Morel was well aware that her attachment to the little cat was growing stronger by the day. Still, she maintained the pretense that this was a temporary situation, even as she scheduled a checkup with the local veterinarian and ordered a custom collar with his name and her address engraved on a small brass plate. The vet visit had been illuminating. Dr. Chambers had estimated Fennel to be about a year old. His missing tail was indeed a birth defect, not the result of injury, and his slightly twisted back leg had likely been broken and healed improperly when he was a kitten. "He's had a rough start," the vet had said, gently palpating Fennel's thin frame. "But he's healthy otherwise. With proper care, he should live a long, normal life." Morel had felt an unexpected surge of relief at those words. The thought of Fennel living a long life, with her, stirred emotions she hadn't allowed herself to examine too closely. On a crisp October morning, as Morel sat on her front porch with a cup of tea and Fennel sprawled contentedly at her feet, a voice called out from the sidewalk, "Good morning, Mrs. Wallace." Morel looked up to see Niles Peterson, the letter carrier who lived 2 doors down. He was dressed in his postal uniform, clearly on his way to work. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson," she replied, somewhat startled by the interaction. Since Robert's death, her conversations with neighbors had been limited to polite nods and brief exchanges about the weather. Niles approached the porch steps, his gaze falling on Fennel. I see you've got company these days. Yes, Morel said, feeling oddly protective. This is Fennel. Niles crouched down, extending his hand toward the cat. Fennel regarded him warily but didn't retreat. Friendly little guy. I remember when he first showed up in the neighborhood. Some of the kids were calling him half-cat because of the missing tail. Morel bristled at this. He's not half anything. He's perfectly whole as he is. Niles looked up, surprised by her tone. Then he smiled. You're right, of course. It's good to see him find a home. Mrs. Roberts at number 92 tried to feed him once, but he wouldn't go near her. Seems he chose you specifically. The thought warmed Morel unexpectedly. Had Fennel really chosen her? Out of all the houses in Millersfield, why had he ended up on her doorstep? He's not much of a talker, is he? Niles observed. Most cats I know never shut up around feeding time. He doesn't need to speak to make himself understood, Morel replied, realizing as she said it how true that statement was. She and Fennel had developed a silent language of their own, small gestures, looks and habits that communicated more clearly than words ever could. Niles nodded. Well, it's nice to see you out and about, Mrs. Wallace. The neighborhood hasn't been the same without your garden. Robert was always so proud of those dahlias you grew. The mention of her husband's name sent a familiar pang through Morel's chest, but it wasn't as sharp as it once had been. Yes, he was, she said softly. I've let things go a bit, but I'm working on it again. That's wonderful to hear. Niles checked his watch. I'd better get going. Can't keep the mail waiting. He straightened up. You know my wife hosts a small book club every other Thursday. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors discussing whatever we're reading over coffee and cake. You'd be welcome to join us. Oh, Morel began, ready with her usual polite refusal to any social invitation. Think about it, Niles said kindly. No pressure. Have a good day, Mrs. Wallace. You too, Fennel. As he walked away, Morel sat in stunned silence. It had been so long since anyone had invited her anywhere that she wasn't sure how to respond. The wall of isolation she had built around herself after Robert's death had become so familiar, she hadn't realized how completely it separated her from the world. Fennel stretched, rose from his spot and jumped lightly into her lap. His warm weight against her chest felt grounding, reassuring. What do you think, Fennel? She murmured, stroking his back. Am I ready for book clubs and neighborly chats? The cat purred softly, kneading her lap with his paws. That evening, as Morel prepared dinner, a proper meal with vegetables and seasonings, not just the minimal sustenance she had subsisted on for so long, she found herself considering Niles's invitation. The thought of stepping into someone else's home, of making small talk and offering opinions on books, sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. But there was something else beneath the anxiety, a small flicker of curiosity, perhaps even anticipation. When had she last discussed a good book with anyone but Fennel? When had she last tasted someone else's cooking or heard laughter around a table? As she served dinner for herself and Fennel, Morel realized that the little cat had done more than just enter her home. He had cracked open a door to the wider world that she had firmly shut years ago. The question now was whether she had the courage to step through it, and what might await her if she did. November brought the first real cold snap of the year to Millersfield. Frost etched delicate patterns on Morel's windows each morning, and the garden that she had begun to reclaim during the summer now retreated into winter dormancy. Inside, the old house creaked and settled as the radiators hissed to life, filling the rooms with dry, metallic-scented warmth. Fennel adapted to the changing season with apparent delight. He discovered the simple pleasure of radiator basking, spending hours stretched out on the warm metal covers. His previously thin coat grew fuller and more luxurious, giving him a regal appearance that belied his humble origins. Morel had surprised herself by accepting Niles's book club invitation. The first meeting had been awkward. She'd forgotten how to make small talk, and had arrived clutching her copy of The Secret Garden like a shield. But Niles's wife, Sarah, had been warmly welcoming, and the other three members, all women from the neighborhood whom Morel recognized but had never really known, seemed genuinely pleased to have her join them. By the third meeting, Morel found herself looking forward to the discussions. She had even offered to host the next gathering at her house, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. What do you think, Fennel? She asked one evening, rearranging the living room furniture in preparation for the upcoming book club meeting. Is the coffee table better here or over there? Fennel, supervising from the back of the sofa, offered no opinion beyond a slow blink. "You're right," Morel nodded. "It doesn't really matter. They're coming to discuss the winter garden, not to inspect my furniture arrangement." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "Though I should probably dust the bookshelves again. And maybe the ceiling fan? Do you think anyone will notice the ceiling fan?" The anxiety that accompanied her return to social life sometimes overwhelmed her. On those days, Fennel seemed to sense her distress. He would stay especially close, his warm presence a reminder that she wasn't facing the world alone. December arrived with a series of snow flurries that gradually transformed Millersfield into a winter wonderland. Morel found herself actually looking forward to the holiday season for the first time in years. She even put up a small Christmas tree, nothing elaborate, just a tabletop pine with a few treasured ornaments from happier times. "We should get you a Christmas gift, Fennel," she told the cat, as she hung a delicate glass snowflake on one of the branches. "Though I'm not sure what you'd want. You seem perfectly content with the cardboard box your bed came in, which, I might add, you prefer to the actual bed." Fennel, who had been batting at a low-hanging ornament, looked up at her with what she could have sworn was a mischievous expression. The week before Christmas brought heavy snowfall and plummeting temperatures. Morel kept the thermostat higher than usual, concerned about Fennel's comfort despite his new winter coat. She noticed that he spent more time curled up in warm spots and seemed less interested in their usual evening play sessions with the feather toy. "Just winter laziness, I suppose," she told Sarah during their weekly phone call. "Another new habit that had developed from the book club meetings. I feel the same way. All I want to do is curl up with a blanket and a good book." But by the day before Christmas Eve, Morel began to worry. Fennel had barely touched his breakfast and had spent most of the day sleeping in a patch of sunlight on the bedroom floor. When she stroked his back, his fur felt unusually hot to the touch. "Fennel, are you feeling all right, dear?" she asked, concern coloring her voice. The cat opened his eyes briefly but didn't raise his head. His breathing seemed more rapid than usual, and when he did move, it was with obvious discomfort. Alarm shot through Morel. She immediately reached for the phone and called Dr. Chambers' veterinary clinic, only to receive a recorded message explaining that they were closed for the holidays and would reopen after New Year's. The message suggested an emergency veterinary hospital in the next town over for urgent cases. Panic rose in Morel's throat. The next town was 20 miles away, and she hadn't driven Robert's old car in over 2 years. The battery was probably dead, and even if it wasn't, the roads were treacherous with ice and snow. Public transportation had been suspended due to the weather, and taxi services weren't operating. "Oh, Fennel," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "What should I do?" For a moment, Morel felt completely overwhelmed. The familiar feeling of helplessness that had enveloped her after Robert's death threatened to return. But then she looked at Fennel, small, vulnerable, depending on her, and something resolved inside her. She would not let him down. With shaking hands, she reached for the phone again and dialed Niles's number. "Niles, I'm so sorry to bother you, especially with the weather so bad, but I need help. It's Fennel, he's ill and I need to get him to the emergency vet in Lakeview." Niles didn't hesitate. "I'll be right over, Mrs. Wallace. My truck has snow chains. We'll get Fennel the help he needs." The 20-mile drive to Lakeview seemed to take forever. Fennel lay quietly in his carrier on Morel's lap, his usual alertness replaced by a worrying lethargy. Niles navigated the snow-covered roads with careful concentration, occasionally glancing over with reassuring words. "We're making good time, Mrs. Wallace. Try not to worry too much." But Morel couldn't help worrying. In the few short months since Fennel had entered her life, he had become her closest companion. The thought of losing him sent waves of fear through her that were almost physical in their intensity. "I should have noticed sooner that something was wrong," she said, gently stroking the carrier with trembling fingers. "He wasn't eating properly yesterday either, but I thought he was just being finicky." "Cats are good at hiding when they're not feeling well," Niles said kindly. "It's a survival instinct. You're getting him help now, and that's what matters." The emergency veterinary hospital was brightly lit and surprisingly busy despite the weather and the holiday season. A harried receptionist took Morel's information, while a veterinary technician whisked Fennel away for examination. The waiting room was filled with other worried pet owners, a young couple cradling a whimpering puppy, an elderly man with a parrot cage covered by a blanket, a teenage girl sniffling quietly as she waited for news of her guinea pig. Mirelle sat rigidly on an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Niles had offered to wait with her, but she had insisted he go home to his family. "It's Christmas Eve tomorrow," she had reminded him. "You've done more than enough by bringing us here. I'll call a taxi for the return trip." The minutes crawled by. Mirelle watched the clock on the wall tick past midnight. Christmas Eve. Last year, she had spent the day in bed, curtains drawn, ignoring the cheerful holiday music that drifted from neighboring houses. This year had been different. She had actually made plans. A small roast chicken for dinner, a few festive cookies, perhaps a holiday movie on television. Simple pleasures that suddenly seemed incredibly precious. "Mrs. Wallace?" A young woman in a white coat appeared in the waiting room doorway. "I'm Dr. Lynn. I've been examining Fennel." Mirelle stood quickly, her heart pounding. Is he all right?" "He has a kidney infection," Dr. Lynn explained, her voice calm and reassuring. "It's serious, but we've caught it in time. We've started him on intravenous antibiotics and fluids to flush his system." "Can I take him home?" Dr. Lynn shook her head. "I'm afraid he'll need to stay with us for at least 48 hours. We need to monitor his kidney function and make sure the antibiotics are working properly." Mirelle felt her knees weaken. "But it's Christmas," she said helplessly, knowing how childish she sounded. The doctor's expression softened. "I understand. We'll take excellent care of him, I promise. And you can call for updates any time. We're staffed 24 hours. Somehow, Mirelle found herself back in the hospital lobby, a printed sheet of information about feline kidney infections clutched in her hand, and a promise to call with an update in the morning ringing in her ears. The clock now read 1:30 a.m. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the temperature had dropped further, turning the world into a crystalline landscape under the bright winter moon. The taxi ride home was a blur. The driver attempted cheerful conversation, undeterred by Mirelle's monosyllabic responses. When they finally reached her house, Mirelle paid him and added a generous tip. It was Christmas Eve after all, and the man was working rather than home with his family. The house felt emptier than it had in years. Mirelle moved through the rooms, turning on lights as if the brightness could somehow fill the void left by Fennel's absence. In the kitchen, his food and water bowls sat untouched. In the living room, his favorite toy mouse lay abandoned beside the small Christmas tree. Exhaustion overwhelmed her. She sank onto the sofa, not bothering to take off her coat or boots. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional creak of settling timbers. "Please be all right," she whispered into the empty room. "Please." Morning brought weak winter sunlight and a phone call from Dr. Lynn. "Fennel had a comfortable night," the vet reported. "His temperature is still elevated, but he's responding well to the antibiotics. If he continues to improve at this rate, you should be able to bring him home the day after tomorrow." Relief washed over Mirelle. "Can I visit him?" "Normally we would encourage that, but with the holiday and the weather, I'm not sure it's wise for you to make the trip again so soon. He's resting comfortably and the staff is giving him plenty of attention." After hanging up, Mirelle wandered aimlessly through the house. Christmas Eve stretched before her, empty hours with nothing to fill them. She considered calling Niles and Sarah to thank them again for their help, but decided against disturbing their holiday preparations. Instead, she forced herself to shower and change into fresh clothes. She made a cup of tea and toast, though she had little appetite. She straightened the already neat living room, dusting surfaces that didn't need dusting. By mid-afternoon, the walls seemed to be closing in around her. On impulse, Mirelle bundled up in her warmest coat, pulled on boots, and stepped outside. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but the sensation was somehow bracing rather than uncomfortable. The neighborhood was quiet, with most families already gathered indoors for holiday celebrations. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the scent of pine and wood fires hung in the crisp air. Christmas lights twinkled from windows and eaves, creating pools of color against the pristine white snow. Mirelle walked slowly down Riverside Street, her boots crunching on the packed snow. She had no destination in mind, simply needing to move to be outside the too-quiet house. "Mrs. Wallace." The call came from across the street. Niles stood in his driveway, struggling to assemble what appeared to be a child's bicycle. He waved her over, and Mirelle found herself crossing the street, grateful for the distraction. "How's Fennel?" Niles asked as she approached. "Better," Morel replied, surprised by the catch in her voice. "They're keeping him until the day after tomorrow, but the doctor says he's responding well to the treatment." "That's wonderful news," Niles smiled warmly. "Are you heading somewhere specific? Family gathering, perhaps?" Morel shook her head. "Just walking." The house felt empty. Understanding filled Niles's eyes. "Sarah's in the kitchen with her sister, drowning us all in Christmas cookies. Would you like to come in for a bit? Nothing formal, just coffee and probably too many sweets." Morel's first instinct was to politely decline, but then she thought of the silent house waiting for her, and of Fennel, who had somehow taught her to open up again. "I'd like that," she said softly, "if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Niles abandoned the half-assembled bicycle. "Sarah will be thrilled. She made enough food for an army, as usual." As Morel followed him up the path to the cheerfully decorated front door, she realized something surprising. For the first time in years, she wasn't dreading Christmas. Despite Fennel's absence, or perhaps because of the concern it awakened, she felt connected to the world again. The little cat had given her an unexpected gift, the courage to care, even knowing that caring always carried the risk of loss. What other changes might Fennel bring to her life once he returned home? And was she finally ready to embrace them? The day after Christmas dawned bright and clear, with sunlight sparkling off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Morel woke early, anticipation humming through her veins. Today was the day she could bring Fennel home. She had called the emergency veterinary hospital the previous evening and received the welcome news that Fennel's condition had improved significantly. His fever was gone, his kidney function tests were nearly normal, and he had even eaten a small amount of food. "You can pick him up tomorrow afternoon," the nurse had told her. "Doctor Lynn wants to see him one more time and prepare his medication before he goes home." Now Morel moved about the house with renewed energy, preparing for Fennel's return. She changed the bedding on his unused cat bed, washed his food and water bowls, and tidied away the Christmas decorations that Sarah had insisted she take home from their impromptu celebration. The day with Niles and Sarah's family had been surprisingly pleasant. Their grandchildren, 7-year-old twins with missing front teeth and boundless energy, had initially intimidated Morel with their exuberance, but they had quickly won her over by asking endless questions about Fennel and solemnly presenting her with handmade get-well cards for him. "When he's all better, can we come see him?" the little girl had asked, her eyes wide with hope. Morel had found herself agreeing before she could overthink it. "Of course. He'd like that, I think." Now, as she straightened the living room in anticipation of these future visitors, Morel realized how much her life had changed in just a few months. From the isolated existence she had created after Robert's death, she had somehow emerged into a world of neighbors, dinner invitations, and children's visits, all because of one small, tailless cat who had appeared on her doorstep. The taxi Morel had arranged arrived precisely at 1 o'clock. The driver was a middle-aged woman named Gloria, who chatted amiably during the journey to Lakeview, sharing stories of her own cats without requiring much response from Morel. "They've got little personalities, don't they?" Gloria said, as they turned into the veterinary hospital's parking lot. "My Whiskers, he's the oldest, rules the house like a little dictator, but my heart would break if anything happened to him. I understand exactly why you're making this trip to get your little one." The hospital was quieter than it had been on Christmas Eve. A different receptionist greeted Morel with a warm smile. "You must be Fennel's mum. He's just being checked one last time by Dr. Lynn. She'll bring him out shortly. In the meantime, I have some paperwork and medication instructions for you." Morel settled the bill, wincing slightly at the amount but not regretting a penny of it, and listened carefully as the receptionist explained the antibiotic regimen Fennel would need to complete at home. "Twice a day for 10 days, the young woman emphasized. "Even if he seems completely better, it's important to finish the entire course." "I understand," Morel nodded. "Will it be difficult to give him the medicine? He's not very fond of being handled except on his own terms." The receptionist smiled sympathetically. "Dr. Lynn will go over some techniques with you. The liquid form is usually easier than pills, especially if you mix it with something tasty like tuna water." A few minutes later, Dr. Lynn appeared carrying a familiar cat carrier. Through the mesh door, Morel could see Fennel's alert green eyes. "Someone's very ready to go home, Doctor." Lynn said, setting the carrier on the counter. "He's made remarkable progress. His kidney function tests are almost back to normal range, and he's eating well." Morel peered into the carrier. "Hello, Fennel. I've missed you." Fennel blinked slowly at her, his special sign of affection, and Morel felt her eyes grow moist. After reviewing the medication instructions once more and demonstrating how to administer the liquid antibiotics, Dr. Lynn handed over the carrier. "Follow up with your regular vet in 2 weeks sooner if you notice any changes in his behavior or appetite. And Merry Christmas," a bit belatedly. The journey home was filled with Fennel's unhappy yowling, the most vocal Morel had ever heard him. Gloria, the taxi driver, laughed good-naturedly. "He's giving you a piece of his mind, isn't he? My cats do the same after vet visits. They blame us, as if we personally stuck them with the needles." When they finally arrived home, Morel thanked Gloria profusely and carried Fennel's carrier into the house. She set it down in the living room and opened the door, expecting him to bolt for a familiar hiding spot. Instead, Fennel emerged cautiously, sniffing the air as if reacquainting himself with his surroundings. He looked thinner than before, his black coat less lustrous. But his eyes were clear and alert as they fixed on Morel. "Welcome home," she said softly. "Everything's ready for you." To her surprise, Fennel walked directly to her and rubbed against her ankles, his body vibrating with a loud purr. The simple gesture of trust and affection brought tears to Morel's eyes. She knelt down, and Fennel allowed her to stroke his back gently. "I was so worried," she whispered. "Please don't scare me like that again." The rest of the day passed in quiet contentment. Fennel ate a small meal, explored the house as if checking that everything remained in its proper place, and finally settled on Morel's lap as she sat reading in her favorite chair. His warm weight and soft purring filled her with a profound sense of peace. That night, Fennel reclaimed his spot on Morel's pillow, curled into a tight ball with his face pressed against her cheek. The familiar rhythm of his breathing lulled her into the deepest sleep she had experienced in days. Morning brought heavy snow and howling winds, a proper winter storm that transformed Millersfield into a white wilderness. Morel stood at the kitchen window, watching snowflakes swirl and dance in the gusting wind. "We're not going anywhere today, Fennel," she told the cat, who was comfortably ensconced on top of the refrigerator, a new perch he had discovered since returning home. "Good thing we have plenty of food and your medicine." The storm continued throughout the day, burying the town under nearly a foot of fresh snow. By evening, the wind had died down, but the temperature had plummeted. The radiators hissed and clanked as they struggled to keep the old house warm. Morel added an extra blanket to her bed and made sure Fennel's favorite spots were equipped with soft cushions. As darkness fell, Morel prepared for bed earlier than usual. The day's enforced inactivity had made her surprisingly tired. She had just settled under the covers with Fennel already purring beside her when a sound from outside caught her attention. It was faint at first, a scratching, scrabbling noise that she might have attributed to the wind or settling snow. But then it became more insistent, a definite scratching at the front door, accompanied by a muffled thump. Morel sat up, her heart racing. Who would be at her door in this weather at this hour? Should she call Niles, the police? Beside her, Fennel had also become alert. His ears were pricked forward, his body tense. Then, to Morel's surprise, he leapt from the bed and darted into the hallway toward the front door. "Fennel, wait!" Morel called, hurriedly putting on her robe and slippers. She followed him to the front door, where he was now pawing insistently at the wood, making small chirping sounds she had never heard from him before. The scratching from outside continued, more frantic now. Taking a deep breath, Morel peered through the peephole but could see nothing in the darkness. She flipped on the porch light and looked again. At first, she thought the snow had simply piled oddly on her welcome mat. Then the pile moved. "Oh!" Morel exclaimed, quickly unlocking the door. As she pulled it open, Fennel darted forward, nearly tripping her. On the welcome mat, the very spot where she had first discovered Fennel months ago, was another cat. This one was grey with white markings, its fur matted with snow and ice. It looked up at Morel with frightened blue eyes, then let out a pitiful meow. Fennel approached the newcomer cautiously. The two cats sniffed each other, their whiskers nearly touching. Then, to Morel's astonishment, Fennel began to groom the grey cat's head, licking away the melting snow with swift, gentle strokes. "Well," Morel said, feeling slightly dazed. "It seems we have another visitor." She knelt down slowly, not wanting to frighten the new arrival. The grey cat watched her warily but didn't flee. Mirelle could now see that it was painfully thin beneath its thick winter coat, with a notched ear that spoke of past hardships. "You poor thing," she murmured. "You must be freezing, and hungry too, I imagine." With gentle movements, she extended her hand, allowing the cat to sniff her fingers. After a moment's hesitation, it pressed its cold nose against her palm. "Come inside, both of you," Mirelle said, straightening up. "Let's get you warm and fed." To her relief, the grey cat followed Fennel into the house without prompting. Once inside, Mirelle closed the door against the bitter cold and stood watching as Fennel led the newcomer toward the kitchen, his tailless form moving with purpose. What was happening here? Had Fennel somehow called this other cat to their home? And what would this unexpected visitor mean for their carefully established routine? As Mirelle followed the cats into the kitchen, she felt a strange mixture of confusion and wonder. Life, it seemed, had more surprises in store for her, whether she was ready for them or not. The grey cat devoured the small plate of chicken and rice that Mirelle prepared, eating with such desperate hunger that she had to gently pull the dish away several times to prevent it from getting sick. Fennel watched from a few feet away, his green eyes tracking every movement of the newcomer. "Slowly," Mirelle murmured as she returned the plate for the third time. "There's plenty more if you need it." Once the grey cat had eaten its fill, Mirelle offered a shallow dish of water, which it lapped eagerly. She noticed now that it was smaller than Fennel, possibly younger. Despite its matted fur and dirty appearance, she could see that it would be quite beautiful when properly cleaned up. "You're a pretty little thing, aren't you?" she said softly. "I wonder where you came from." The cat had no collar, and its skittish behavior suggested it wasn't someone's beloved pet that had simply wandered away from home. Like Fennel, it showed signs of having lived rough for some time. Mirelle found an old towel and cautiously approached the grey cat, which tensed but allowed her to gently dry its damp fur. As she worked, she discovered that it was a female, with delicate features and unusually expressive eyes. "We should call Dr. Chambers in the morning," Mirelle told Fennel, who had maintained his watchful position throughout the proceedings. "Make sure our new friend is healthy before we decide what to do next." But what would they do next? Mirelle wondered, as she prepared a makeshift bed for the grey cat using an old cushion and a soft blanket. Would she attempt to find its owner? Take it to a shelter? Or had Fennel already made the decision for her by bringing this stray into their home? The grey cat settled onto the cushion with a sigh that seemed to contain equal parts exhaustion and relief. Fennel, after circling the newcomer one more time, finally returned to Mirelle's side and led the way back to the bedroom. That night, Mirelle lay awake long after Fennel had resumed his spot on her pillow. Her mind raced with questions and possibilities. One cat had already transformed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. What would a second one mean? By morning, the snowstorm had passed, leaving Millersfield blanketed in pristine white. Mirelle woke to find Fennel missing from his usual spot. Concerned, she quickly pulled on her robe and went in search of him. She found both cats in the kitchen. The grey cat remained on its cushion, but Fennel sat nearby, his attention fixed on the newcomer. As Mirelle watched, Fennel stood, stretched, and approached the cushion. After a moment's hesitation, he settled down beside the grey cat, their bodies touching lightly. The grey cat shifted to make room, then began to purr, a surprisingly deep sound from such a small creature. "I see you've made a friend," Mirelle said, smiling despite her lingering concerns. Dr. Chambers' office reopened that day after the holiday break. The receptionist, familiar with Mirelle now, sounded unsurprised when she called to report finding another stray. "We've had several come in since the cold snap," the woman explained. "Cats who normally manage on their own seek shelter when the temperature drops this low. We can see your new friend this afternoon if you can make it in. Dr. Chambers will check for a microchip and assess her overall health." Getting the grey cat into Fennel's carrier proved challenging. She resisted Mirelle's attempts to pick her up, darting under furniture and hissing when cornered. It was Fennel who finally solved the problem. He entered the carrier himself, curled up inside, and after a few minutes, the grey cat cautiously followed him. "Well done," Mirelle praised, quickly closing the door behind them. "Though now you're both going to the vet." The grey cat, whom Dr. Chambers estimated to be about 10 months old, had no microchip and no signs of ever having had a home. Like Fennel, she showed evidence of having lived rough: the notched ear, several small scars and mild frostbite on the pads of her paws. Otherwise, she's in surprisingly good condition, the vet reported after a thorough examination. No parasites, no infections, she's underweight but not dangerously so. With proper care, she should make a full recovery from the frostbite within a week or two. And if no one claims her? Morell asked, watching as the technician returned both cats to the carrier. Dr. Chambers smiled knowingly. The shelter is always an option, of course, but something tells me that won't be necessary. Morell didn't confirm or deny this assumption. On the taxi ride home, she tried to think practically about the situation. Her house was certainly large enough for another cat. The expense would be manageable with her pension. But was she ready for another responsibility, another attachment? She glanced at the carrier where the two cats were huddled together, the grey one partially hidden behind Fennel's protective form. There was something about their evident connection that tugged at her heart. Fennel, who had been so alone himself, had recognized a kindred spirit in this other outcast and had taken action. Perhaps there was a lesson there. That evening, as Morell sat in her living room with a cup of tea, she watched the two cats exploring each other and their shared environment. The grey cat had become more confident, venturing further from her cushion to investigate the various rooms. Fennel followed at a respectful distance, occasionally showing her interesting features like the heating vent in the hallway or the window seat with its view of the bird feeder. "She needs a name," Morell said aloud, causing both cats to look at her. "We can't keep calling her the grey cat." She considered traditional cat names: Smoky, Misty, Shadow, but none seemed to fit this delicate creature with the watchful blue eyes. As with Fennel, Morell found herself drawn to something less conventional, something with personal meaning. The memory came suddenly, a flash of her mother's garden in early spring, the first blossoms pushing through the snow, tiny purple flowers with heart-shaped leaves that had always seemed impossibly brave to Morell, blooming when winter still held the world in its grip. "Viola," she said, testing the name. "What do you think, Fennel? Shall we call her Viola?" Fennel blinked slowly at her, then returned his attention to the grey cat, to Viola, who had discovered a stray piece of kibble beneath the kitchen table and was batting it across the floor. Over the next week, Viola gradually settled into life in Morell's home. Her frostbitten paws healed, her coat became glossy with proper nutrition, and her initially skittish behavior gave way to cautious affection. She began to seek out Morell for brief petting sessions, though she still startled at sudden movements or loud noises. With Fennel, however, Viola showed no such reservation. The two cats formed a bond that fascinated Morell. They slept curled together, groomed each other, and seemed to communicate in some silent language that excluded human understanding. Fennel, who had always been relatively independent, became almost protective of the smaller cat, ensuring she got her share at mealtimes and leading her to the warmest spots in the house. "They're good for each other," Sarah observed during a visit in early January. She watched as Viola cautiously approached her extended hand, sniffing curiously before retreating to Fennel's side. Just like people, cats need companionship. Fennel probably gets lonely when you're not home. Morell had never thought of it that way. She had assumed Fennel's solitary nature matched her own, that he was content with their quiet life together. But seeing him with Viola revealed another side of him, playful, nurturing, engaged. "I think you're right," Morell admitted. "They do seem happier together." Sarah smiled, reaching over to squeeze Morell's hand. "You seem happier too, you know, since Fennel came, and now with Viola. There's more light in your eyes." Was it true? Morell considered the question that evening as she prepared dinner with both cats, weaving figure eights around her ankles. Her life had certainly changed in the past few months. The house felt lived in again, with cat toys scattered across the floor and fur on every surface, despite regular vacuuming. Her days had structure beyond mere existence: feeding times, play sessions, grooming, vet visits. Her social circle, while still small, had expanded beyond what she would have thought possible a year ago. And yes, there was happiness there, not the uncomplicated joy of her younger years, but something deeper, more nuanced. A happiness that acknowledged pain and loss, but refused to be defined by them. A happiness built on new connections, new possibilities. As if sensing her thoughts, Fennel jumped onto the counter beside her, a normally forbidden location that Morell found herself ignoring more often than not these days. He butted his head against her hand, purring loudly. From the floor, Viola watched with bright eyes, her tail swishing in anticipation of the meal to come. Looking at them, at the family they had somehow become, Mirelle felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. These two discarded creatures, unwanted by the world, had found each other, and in doing so had found her too. What would the future hold for this unlikely household? Mirelle wasn't sure, but for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to finding out. Spring arrived in Millersfield with an explosion of color and scent. Cherry trees burst into pink blossom along Main Street, daffodils nodded their bright heads in front yards, and the air filled with the sweet perfume of hyacinths and the cheerful chorus of returned birdsong. In Mirelle's garden, the transformation was perhaps most dramatic of all. What had been an overgrown tangle the previous year now showed signs of loving attention. Neatly trimmed bushes, freshly turned soil in the flower beds, and small green shoots promising summer blooms all testified to hours of careful work. Mirelle stood on her back porch, surveying her handiwork with satisfaction. Gardening gloves dangled from one hand, a smudge of dirt marked her cheek, and her aging knees protested the morning spent weeding, but the contentment she felt more than compensated for any discomfort. At her feet, Fennel and Viola explored the newly refreshed space, sniffing at turned earth and batting at dandelion fluff that floated on the gentle breeze. In the months since Viola's arrival, both cats had flourished. Fennel's black coat now gleamed in the sunlight. His once thin frame filled out with healthy muscle. Viola had grown from the frightened, bedraggled stray into a confident young cat whose silvery fur and bright blue eyes drew admiring comments from visitors. "So you two stay out of the flower beds," Mirelle warned, though without much conviction. She had long since accepted that sharing her life with cats meant accepting a certain amount of chaos and compromise. The sound of the front doorbell drew her attention. Wiping her hands on her gardening apron, Mirelle made her way through the house. Both cats abandoned their exploration to follow her, curious about the unexpected visitor. Opening the door revealed Niles, dressed in his postal uniform and holding a large envelope. "Morning, Mrs. Wallace," he greeted her cheerfully. "Special delivery that needed a signature. Thought I'd drop it off personally rather than leave a notice." "That's very kind, Niles, and please, I've told you to call me Mirelle." He handed over the envelope with a smile. "Old habits. How are the dynamic duo today?" He crouched down to greet Fennel and Viola, who had appeared at Mirelle's feet. "Causing their usual mischief," Mirelle replied fondly. "Viola knocked over a vase this morning, and Fennel has been digging in the garden again. Keeping you on your toes." Niles straightened up. "That's good for you." After he left, Mirelle examined the envelope. It was from her sister, Catherine, who lived in Arizona. They had spoken on the phone several times in recent months, another relationship Mirelle had allowed to fade after Robert's death and was now cautiously rebuilding. Inside was a short letter and several photographs. The letter contained family news and an invitation. "The grandkids would love to meet their great-aunt Mirelle, and I've told them all about your famous cats. Think about visiting this summer. The guest room is always ready for you." Mirelle studied the family photos, her niece's children, Catherine's garden, the desert landscape so different from Millersfield's lush greenery. A year ago, she would have filed the invitation away with a vague sense of guilt, never intending to actually go. Now the possibility of travel, of extending her slowly expanding world even further, didn't seem quite so daunting. "What do you think?" she asked Fennel and Viola, who had lost interest in the mail and were now grooming each other on the window seat. "Could you two manage without me for a week or so? Mrs. Peterson says she'd be happy to look after you." The rest of the day passed in pleasant domesticity. Mirelle finished her gardening, prepared a simple lunch, and spent the afternoon working on the sweater she was knitting for Sarah's newest grandchild. Fennel and Viola alternated between napping in patches of sunlight and engaging in energetic games of chase throughout the house. As evening approached, Mirelle settled into her favorite chair with a book. Viola immediately claimed her lap, while Fennel took his customary position on the arm of the chair, close enough to receive occasional strokes, but maintaining his characteristic independence. A noise from outside, a car door closing, followed by voices, caught their attention. Fennel's ears pricked forward, and he jumped down to investigate. Viola, never one to be left behind, followed quickly. Curious, Morel set aside her book and went to the window. A family stood at the edge of her front yard, a young couple and a little girl of about 6 or 7. The woman held something in her arms that Morel couldn't quite make out. The doorbell rang, sending both cats scurrying for cover. Viola under the sofa, Fennel to his observation post atop the bookshelf. Smoothing her hair, Morel went to answer. "Mrs. Wallace?" the young woman asked tentatively. "I'm Jenny Miller. This is my husband Tom and our daughter Lily. We heard you might be able to help us." Morel looked at them, puzzled. "Help you? I'm not sure I understand." The woman glanced at her husband, who nodded encouragingly. She shifted the bundle in her arms, and Morel now saw that it was a small animal carrier. From inside came a faint mewing sound. "We found this kitten behind the supermarket," Jenny explained. "It was all alone, no mother cat in sight. We took it to Dr. Chambers and he said it's healthy but too young to be on its own. We would keep it, but Tom's allergic and we already have a dog that doesn't like cats." "Dr. Chambers suggested we talk to you," Tom added. "He said you have a way with special cases." Little Lily stepped forward, her eyes wide and serious. "It's got one eye, Mrs. Wallace. The other one never grew. Nobody wants it because it looks different, but I think it's beautiful anyway." Morel felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar sensation, both painful and sweet. "May I see?" she asked quietly. Jenny set the carrier down and opened the door. Inside was a tiny orange tabby kitten, no more than 6 weeks old. As Morel knelt down to look closer, it wobbled toward her on unsteady legs. The child was right. Where its right eye should have been was a sealed eyelid, giving its small face an asymmetrical, slightly startled appearance. "Hello, little one," Morel whispered. The kitten mewed again, a high, thin sound that seemed to ask a question. Behind Morel, a soft thump announced Fennel's descent from the bookshelf. His green eyes peered curiously at the carrier. Even Viola had emerged from her hiding place, drawn by the kitten's cries. Time seemed to slow as Morel watched Fennel approach the small carrier. The black cat paused, his nose twitching as he caught the kitten's scent. Then, with deliberate care, he moved closer until he could peer directly inside. The tiny orange tabby gazed back with its one good eye, its whole body trembling slightly. To Morel's amazement, Fennel made a soft chirping sound, the same sound she had heard him make the night Viola appeared on their doorstep. The kitten responded with another pitiful mew, and Fennel looked back at Morel with an expression she had come to recognize well over the past months. "I think your cat is trying to tell you something," Tom said, a hint of wonder in his voice. Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve. "See, Mommy, I told you Mrs. Wallace would help. Her cats know when other cats need them." Morel stood slowly, her knees protesting again after crouching too long. She looked at the hopeful faces of the family before her, then at Fennel's expectant gaze, and finally at the tiny kitten with its one bright eye. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea?" she asked the Millers. "We should probably talk about proper kitten care." The relief on Jenny's face was immediate. "We'd love that, and we brought some supplies, Doctor. Chambers recommended. Kitten formula, a soft blanket, that sort of thing." As they settled in the living room, the kitten was cautiously released from its carrier. Fennel approached immediately, circling the wobbly little creature and sniffing it thoroughly. Viola hung back, watching from a safe distance with typical caution. "What will you name it?" Lily asked, her eyes fixed on the kitten as it stumbled toward Fennel and attempted to bat at his ear. Morel hadn't considered names yet, but as she watched the tiny orange tabby fearlessly approach the much larger black cat, a word came to her mind. It was the name of a spice her grandmother had used in special occasion cakes. Warm, distinctive, slightly exotic. "Saffron," she said. "I think I'll call this little one Saffron." Lily clapped her hands delightedly. "First Fennel, then Viola, now Saffron. You name your cats after plants and flowers." Morel smiled, realizing the child was right. She hadn't consciously created a theme, but something in her had been drawn to these natural names, reminiscent of gardens and growth and renewal. "How did you know about Fennel and Viola?" she asked, curious about how the Millers had found their way to her door. Tom explained that they had taken the kitten to Dr. Chambers that morning. "When he heard where we found it, he told us about another black cat someone had brought in months ago. One without a tail. Said that cat had found a good home with you, and later helped bring in another stray during the winter storm. He thought you might have room in your heart for one more special case. Mirelle watched as Fennel began to groom the kitten, his rough tongue carefully cleaning its small orange head. Viola had finally ventured closer, her curiosity overcoming her wariness. "Dr. Chambers was right," she said softly. "There's always room for one more." After the Millers left, Mirelle set about preparing a comfortable space for Saffron. A small box lined with soft towels became a temporary bed, positioned in a warm corner of the kitchen where she could keep a close eye on the new arrival. That evening, as she prepared the kitten formula according to Dr. Chambers' instructions, Mirelle found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past year. From the isolated existence she had created after Robert's death, she had been drawn back into life, first by a tailless black cat who refused to be ignored, then by a frostbitten grey stray who needed shelter, and now by this tiny one-eyed kitten who had nowhere else to go. But it wasn't just the cats who had changed her life. There was Niles and Sarah with their warmth and inclusion, the book club members who had become friends, even little Lily Miller, whose innocent observation about plant names had made Mirelle smile. Connections had formed, bridges rebuilt, walls dismantled, all because she had opened her door to one small creature in need. "Nobody wanted you," she said to Fennel, who sat watching as she fed Saffron with a tiny bottle. "Nobody wanted any of you. But look what happened when I let you in." When bedtime came, Mirelle expected to place Saffron in the prepared box. Instead, she found herself carrying the kitten to her bedroom, along with the necessary supplies for nighttime feedings. Fennel and Viola followed, clearly approving of this arrangement. As Mirelle settled under the covers, Fennel took his usual place on her pillow. Viola curled at her feet, and between them, nestled securely in the hollow of Mirelle's shoulder, tiny Saffron purred himself to sleep. "They say good things come in threes," Mirelle whispered into the darkness, stroking the kitten's soft fur with one finger. "I think they're right." In the days that followed, Saffron's presence brought new energy to the household. The kitten's boundless curiosity and playful nature drew even Viola into games of chase and pounce. Fennel assumed a protective role that seemed to come naturally to him, keeping a watchful eye on Saffron's explorations and intervening when the kitten's enthusiasm exceeded its limited coordination. Mirelle found herself laughing more than she had in years, charmed by Saffron's antics, and the sight of her two adult cats patiently tolerating the newcomer's attempts to climb their tails, or in Fennel's case, where his tail would have been. One particularly beautiful afternoon in late April, Mirelle sat on her front porch, enjoying the warm sunshine. Fennel lounged nearby on the railing, while Viola and Saffron played a complex game involving a fallen leaf on the wooden planks. The sound of children's laughter drew her attention to the sidewalk, where Lily Miller and the Peterson twins were passing by on their way home from school. When they spotted Mirelle, they waved enthusiastically. "Mrs. Wallace, can we see the new kitten again?" Lily called out. "Of course," Mirelle replied, smiling at their eagerness. "Come on up." As the children gathered on her porch, exclaiming over Saffron's playful leaps and Viola's graceful movements, Mirelle felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This moment of shared joy, of connection, of life being lived fully, was what had been missing in the dark years after Robert's death. She glanced at Fennel, who was observing the scene with his usual calm dignity. Those intelligent green eyes met hers, and Mirelle could have sworn she saw understanding in their depths. "It was you," she whispered, too softly for the excited children to hear. "You started all of this." Fennel blinked slowly at her, his special sign of affection, and Mirelle felt her heart expand with gratitude for this small, tailless cat who had appeared on her doorstep when she needed him most. Later that evening, after the children had gone home and the younger cats had worn themselves out with play, Mirelle sat in her garden with a cup of tea. Fennel joined her, settling comfortably in her lap, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You know," she told him, stroking his sleek black fur, "when you first came to my door, I thought I was the one offering shelter. I never realized you were actually rescuing me." Fennel purred in response, the vibration of his small body resonating against her hand. In the warm twilight, surrounded by the garden she had reclaimed, and with the gentle weight of Fennel in her lap, Mirelle reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had begun with one simple act of kindness. By opening her door to a cat nobody wanted, She had opened herself to a world of possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. And in that opening, she had discovered an essential truth, that healing often comes from the most unexpected sources, that family can be found in the most unlikely forms, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply making room in your life for another living being who needs you as much as you need them. "Thank you," Morel whispered to Fennel, to the garden, to the universe itself. "Thank you for giving me back my life." As darkness settled over Millersfield, lights came on in windows all along Riverside Street. Inside each home, lives were being lived, stories unfolding, connections growing. And in house number 86, where silence had once reigned, the sounds of life, of purring cats and running water and soft laughter, filled every corner with their gentle music. For Morel Wallace and her 3 remarkable cats, the future stretched ahead like an unopened gift, not without challenges, certainly, but rich with possibilities and warmed by the steady flame of belonging that they had kindled together. Because sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest steps, and sometimes the most profound healing comes in the form of a little black tailless kitten that nobody wanted, until something amazing happened. 5 years had passed since Saffron had joined Morel's growing family. The once tiny orange kitten with one eye had grown into a handsome, confident cat whose boundless energy and playful spirit continued to bring daily joy to the household. On this particular September morning, golden sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of the house on Riverside Street. The garden outside blazed with late summer glory, dahlias nodding their heavy heads, black-eyed Susans reaching toward the sun, and the herb garden filled with fragrant ripeness. Morel stood at the counter, carefully packing sandwiches into a wicker basket. At 77, she moved a little slower than she once had, but her hands remained steady and her eyes bright behind the reading glasses perched on her nose. "That should be enough for everyone," she murmured, surveying her handiwork, "though I suspect Sarah will bring extra cookies as usual." From his favorite spot atop the refrigerator, Fennel observed the preparations with dignified interest. At approximately 7 years old now, he had settled into a mature grace. His black fur showed a few silver hairs around his muzzle, but his green eyes remained as alert and intelligent as ever. Viola, curled on a kitchen chair in a patch of sunlight, opened one blue eye at the sound of Morel's voice, then promptly went back to sleep. She had become the most serene of the 3 cats, preferring quiet contemplation to the roughhousing that still occasionally broke out between Fennel and Saffron himself. The orange tabby was currently stalking a dust mote beneath the table, his single golden eye focused with comical intensity on his imaginary prey. "Don't you 3 get into any mischief while I'm gone," Morel told them, knowing full well that her words fell on deliberately deaf ears. "Mrs. Jensen will be over at noon to check on you and refresh your water." The doorbell chimed, and Morel heard the front door open, followed by familiar voices. "We're here, Morel," Sarah called. "Are you ready for the big day?" Niles appeared in the kitchen doorway, his once dark hair now completely silver, but his smile as warm as ever. "Need help with that basket? Looks heavy." "I've got it," Morel insisted, though she allowed him to take it from her hands. "Is everything set up at the park?" "All arranged," Sarah assured her, coming in behind her husband. At 74, Sarah's face was a map of laugh lines and her figure had softened, but she moved with the energetic purpose that had always characterized her. "The tables are decorated, Tom has the grill going, and the children are already running wild." The annual neighborhood picnic had been Sarah's idea 3 years ago, but Morel had quickly become one of its most enthusiastic organizers. What had begun as a small gathering of a few families had grown into a community tradition that now included residents from all over Millersfield. "Is Jenny bringing her famous potato salad?" Morel asked as she gathered her sun hat and light sweater. "And did Lily remember to make the lemonade?" "Everything's under control," Niles assured her, "though everyone's waiting for you. You are the guest of honor, after all." Morel waved away this comment, though a pleased flush colored her cheeks. "Nonsense. Today is about the whole community, not just me." But even as she said it, Morel felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. Today was special, not just another neighborhood picnic, but the official unveiling of the new pet adoption program that she had helped establish with Dr. Chambers. The Second Chance initiative, as they had named it, was designed to match special pets, animals with disabilities, older pets, or those who had experienced trauma, with suitable homes in Millersfield and the surrounding area. What had begun as Morell's passionate idea had quickly gained support from local businesses, the veterinary clinic, and dozens of volunteers. "Ready?" Sarah asked, holding the front door open. Morell paused, looking back at her 3 cats. Fennel had descended from the refrigerator and sat with perfect posture in the center of the kitchen floor, as if offering his blessing on her departure. Viola remained curled in her sunny spot, the picture of contentment. Saffron had abandoned his dust mote hunt and was now investigating the possibility of claiming Fennel's elevated territory, while the older cat was distracted. "Ready," Morell confirmed, a smile spreading across her face. The walk to Millersfield Community Park took less than 10 minutes, but it was filled with greetings as neighbors called out to Morell from porches and gardens. Once a nearly invisible presence in the town, she had become something of a local celebrity since the founding of the Second Chance program. "There's Mrs. Wallace," a childish voice called out as they approached the park entrance. Lily Miller, now 11 and growing into a thoughtful young woman, raced toward them. "Everyone's waiting for you." The park had been transformed for the occasion. Colorful banners hung between trees, tables laden with food lined one side of the central lawn, and a small podium had been set up beneath the park's largest oak tree. But what caught Morell's attention was the special area cordoned off with cheerful ribbons, the meet and greet section, where prospective pet owners could interact with animals from the local shelter. Dr. Chambers, now semi-retired but still actively involved in the program, waved to Morell from this area. Beside him, several volunteers managed kennels and carriers containing dogs and cats of all sizes and colors. Each animal wore a bright bandana with the Second Chance logo, a simple heart with a paw print inside. "There you are," Dr. Chambers called out. "We've already had 2 adoptions this morning. The Parker family is taking home old Bruno. You remember, the 3-legged retriever. And Mrs. Anderson has fallen in love with that cross-eyed Siamese we rescued last month." Pride and joy warmed Morell's heart as she surveyed the scene. In just 18 months, the program had found homes for over 60 animals that might otherwise have been overlooked. Each success story felt personal to her, a continuation of the miracle that had begun with Fennel's appearance on her doorstep all those years ago. "It's time for the ceremony," Mayor Wilson announced, approaching with his hand extended. "Are you ready to cut the ribbon, Mrs. Wallace?" The small ceremony that followed was brief but meaningful. Mayor Wilson spoke about community and compassion. Dr. Chambers detailed the program's successes, and then Morell was called to the podium. Public speaking had never been her strength, but when she looked out at the gathered faces, friends, neighbors, people who had become like family, the words came easily. "5 years ago, I was a lonely widow who had shut herself away from the world," she began, her voice clear in the autumn air. "Then a little black cat with no tail showed up on my doorstep. Nobody wanted him. He was different, incomplete in some people's eyes. But Fennel wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for connection, for belonging. And in finding a home with me, he helped me find my way back to the world." She paused, surveying the attentive faces before her. "That's what Second Chance is all about. It's not just finding homes for animals that might be overlooked. It's about the healing power of connection, for the animals and for the people who welcome them into their lives. Each adoption is a beginning, not an end. A start of a new story, a new family, a new chance at joy." After the ceremony, as people lined up to meet the available pets, Morell found herself surrounded by well-wishers and friends. Jenny and Tom Miller shared news of their recent vacation. The Peterson twins, now teenagers, eagerly showed her photos of the shelter cat they had adopted the previous month. Sarah introduced her to new neighbors who had recently moved to Riverside Street. As the afternoon progressed, Morell took a moment to sit quietly at the edge of the celebration, watching the community she had rediscovered in action. Children played tag across the grassy expanse. Older residents shared stories over coffee and cake. Young families sprawled on blankets, enjoying the perfect September weather. And throughout it all, connections formed and strengthened, the invisible threads that bound them all together. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Niles asked, settling beside her with a paper cup of lemonade. Morell accepted the drink with a smile. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. How much I've changed. For the better, Niles nodded. Though I always knew there was more to you than that quiet widow who never left her house. Robert would be proud, you know. The mention of her late husband no longer brought pain, only a gentle warmth of remembrance. I think he would, she agreed. He always loved animals, and people too. Speaking of animals, Niles said, gesturing toward the park entrance, isn't that Mrs. Jensen rushing this way? Seems a bit flustered. Morel looked up to see her neighbor hurrying toward them, her expression a mixture of concern and amusement. Morel, thank goodness I found you. You need to come home right away. Alarm shot through Morel. What's happened? Are the cats all right? Mrs. Jensen caught her breath. The cats are fine, but you have visitors on your front porch. I went to check on them as promised, and there they were, just waiting. I couldn't very well leave them there, but I didn't know what to do with them either. Confused but relieved that her cats were safe, Morel made her excuses to the gathering and hurried home with Mrs. Jensen, who refused to elaborate further on these mysterious visitors. As they turned onto Riverside Street, Morel could see nothing unusual about her house from a distance, but as they drew closer, she noticed a small movement on the front porch. Oh my, she breathed, stopping in her tracks. On her welcome mat, the very spot where Fennel had first appeared, where Viola had sought shelter from the winter storm, where Saffron's carrier had been set down, sat a mother cat with 3 tiny kittens. The mother was a calico, thin but not emaciated, with clear eyes and a cautious expression. The kittens, barely old enough to be away from their mother, tumbled over each other in a blur of multicolored fur. They weren't there when I left for work this morning, Mrs. Jensen explained, but when I came to check on your 3 as promised, there they were, almost as if they knew, Morel finished softly. As if they knew this was a place where they would be welcome. Approaching slowly, Morel knelt down to eye level with the calico mother. The cat regarded her warily but didn't flee, even as Morel extended a gentle hand. Hello, Morel said softly. You've come to the right place. From inside the house came a familiar scratching at the door, Fennel, no doubt sensing the newcomers on his territory. But Morel knew without question that there would be no rejection here. Somehow her home had become a beacon for those in need, a place where the unwanted and overlooked could find acceptance. And as she carefully gathered the calico family to bring them inside, Morel felt her heart expand once more with gratitude for the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. What had begun with one small tailless cat had grown into a purpose larger than herself, a legacy of compassion, connection, and second chances that would ripple outward long after she was gone. Some might call it coincidence, or fate, or simply the strange workings of a mysterious universe. But Morel Wallace, once lonely widow and now surrounded by life in all its messy, beautiful complexity, preferred to call it by a simpler name. She called it love, the end,